Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. We are so thrilled that you could be with us today, and you're in for a real treat because we have some fantastic speakers. My name is Judy Braus, and I'm the Executive Director of the North American Association for Environmental Education, and just thrilled to welcome you here. And I will be moderating today's session, which is all about empowering climate action through education. And today's webinar is focused on really looking at climate change education and how we think about action. And it's the second part of a two-part series. And if you missed the first part, you can get a copy of the recording. But again, today we're talking about climate change education and action. And we are helping to and hoping to connect educators in Taiwan and the United States working to advance climate change education and to build capacity, share resources and ideas, and really support informed climate action. This is the second webinar again in this Taiwan-U.S. bilateral series on climate education, and it's brought to you by three partners: the National Taiwan University, Taiwan's National Climate Change Initiative, and the Global Environmental Education Partnership. And in case you didn't know much about any of these three, I'm just going to say briefly a little bit more about each. The National Taiwan University is Taiwan's flagship university, has 11 colleges, 54 departments, 108 graduate institutions, and it's all about sustainable development and achieving the sustainable development goals and addressing social responsibility with more than 24,000 students. And the Global Environmental Education Partnership, or the GEEP, was launched by the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the Taiwan Environmental Protection Administration, and NAAEE in 2014. And the GEEP is a learning network designed to share effective practice, build leadership, and strengthen the practice of environmental education to address big sustainability challenges like climate change. So you can learn more at thegeep.org. And finally, the Education for Climate Change program was established in 2012 in Taiwan to support teaching and learning in climate education and to build the country's capacity to address the climate crisis, and it's supported by the Ministry of Education. So thanks to all the partners. And just a few reminders to everyone, all of you are muted. That's to manage the noise, but you can always talk to us through the question bar. So add your questions, your comments throughout, and you'll get a copy of the recording. We are recording this, so you don't need to take notes, and you can share the recording with your colleagues or those who couldn't join us today. And again, if you look at your screen, if you're on your laptop, there's a place where you can ask a question. See the red box there. If you're on your phone, it's with the question mark. So we look forward to your questions throughout. We're going to have three provocative speakers, but first I want to thank Maury and Melissa for helping to organize this series. They have been fantastic and helping to line all of this up, do the publicity, and they are behind the scenes helping us monitor the questions and the technology. So thanks to both of you for being here and for all the hard work. And Maury, we love your dog. Great photo. Thanks to both of you. And now to the best part is hearing from our three speakers. These are three amazing educators talking about how to empower climate action through education and also talking about what works in climate education. All three are incredible thinkers and educators, and they're going to share their perspectives on climate change and what's happening in Taiwan and some thoughts about what's happening in the United States. The way this is going to work is I'll introduce each panelist in turn. They will speak for about 8 to 10 minutes, and then we'll take 1 or 2 questions after each of them. And then at the end of the 3 presentations, we will save some time for any final thoughts. So we have Professor Shin-Cheng, we have Professor Martha Monroe, and we have Jen Kretser, and we're so excited to have all 3 of them. So now I'm going to start with our first panelist, Professor Shin-Cheng, who is a dear friend and champion of environmental education in Taiwan and around the world. Shin-Cheng graduated with a doctoral degree specializing in water resources and environmental systems from Cornell University in the late 90s, and he has been working ever since on climate and environmental education all through his career. In addition to his teaching positions, Professor Ye has also served as board director of the Chinese Society of Environmental Education and was Deputy Minister of the Environmental Protection Administration from 2012 to 2014. He was also one of the main supporters and developers of Taiwan's Environmental Education Act, and he has helped implement the act and assist with the certification process. Shin-Cheng is currently serving as professor and dean at the Graduate Institute of Environmental Education at National Taiwan Normal University, and he launched and attended the first Global Environmental Education Partnership meeting in 2014. So I am so excited to turn this over to you and really excited that you could be here today, Professor Ye.
Yeah, thank you, Judy. Okay, everybody, I would like to spend some time to introduce some perspectives about climate change education, what's happening in Taiwan, both challenges and opportunities. Okay, next. Next. Okay, if we look at the knowledge part of climate change literacy in Taiwan, we just conducted a survey last year for our EPA. You can see that for the general public or for students, well, I can say that we have good knowledge scores for the climate, and both of us fit the normal distribution. Basically, it's good enough. Next. And also in Taiwan, we people have a very strong consensus on climate change. According to the 10 years for the last decades, from the surveys conducted by NGOs, academic institutions, we can get a number between 90% to 95% of people who think climate change is real. Next. Next. If we compare to the number in the United States, okay, that's last year, that's a 72%. The number is already a little bigger than that several years ago. Next. Okay, for climate action, people in Taiwan, basically, we got good scores well, for any kinds of surveys in terms of knowledge. But for actions, you can see that less than 40% of the college students, they think they feel interested in joining some climate-related activities. I mean, the civil actions. But they tend to do something for the climate by themselves in their daily lives. Next. It's also the case for the general public. People think, well, I can well adjust the temperature in summer times, not too low to save energy, but people in general not interested in attending some civil actions for climate. Next. Okay, that's 2 years ago. You must know this. The Swedish girl, Greta, she promoted Friday for Future. At that time, not so many people attended the event held in Taiwan, that's in front of our parliament. Next. But some high school students, they organize their classes to hold some of the few events at that time in Taiwan. Next. In the last year, last September, we had, I think, the event having the most people participation last year in Taiwan, about 1,000 participants in general, basically young people participation at that time. Next. Okay, we can see this. The general public basically have a higher self-efficacy than college students. I think because college students, they are young people, they don't think they can change the world. But for the general public, for the adults, they have a higher self-efficacy, according to our survey. Next. So that's a background. So the issue is how to incorporate climate change education into formal education. Judy just said that several years ago, our Ministry of Education started this mission. According to our curriculum guidelines of the 12-year basic education just implemented about 4 years ago, we have 8 domains for our formal education, including language arts, mathematics, etc. Domains means something that will be included in our entrance examinations. Okay, next. And also we have 19 issues. Okay, issues means, well, it's a very, very comprehensive, will not included in our entrance examinations. And well, one of the 19 issues is environmental education. Next. And under environmental education, we have 5 topics, and the climate change is one of them. So we know that climate change in the whole framework maybe occupied 1% of the efforts, well, competing with the other issues and also the domains. Next. Okay, so we still have several strategies for incorporating climate change education. For example, we can do immersive design, integrative design in domains or isolated units for different kinds of schools. For example, the first 2 apply for elementary and the junior high schools, and the last apply for the senior high schools in Taiwan. So we have all kinds of designs and all kinds of combinations. Next. Okay, and this year's, you must know that well, we are now promoting SDGs. So this year's, we are trying to add CCE and the ESD and the SDGs together, so that we can invite teachers in more domains with diversified expertise to and interest to be involved. Because not just the experts or the teachers in the fields of environmental education, but also from other domains or other perspectives, other viewpoints, and also introduce SDGs to schools with climate change education. Next. Next. So we held many workshops, conferences, lectures to promote climate change education in the formal education system. For example, like this, we held workshops, so teachers, they work together, try to develop some teaching materials. Next. Okay, that's the photo we took when they tried to design a climate change education module with SDGs. Next. Yeah, the same. Next. Okay, okay, that's it's activity held by our Ministry of Education every year. So sometimes we have a big gathering, and these are 2 packages of teaching modules. The left ones are for elementary schools. The right ones are for senior high schools. Just take this as an example. And we put several kinds of issues and also SDGs to the modules. Okay, next. Okay, so we have some obstacles. For example, like well, in Taiwan, we still have the system of entrance examinations. So the teaching learning actually led by examinations. But the climate change not thought to be a subject included in the entrance examinations. And also, we still have some administrative inertia and barriers because the formal education systems were led by some authorities not responsible for climate change. And also teachers not in the task force of environmental education tend not to participate in climate change education because climate change is under environmental education. And also the last one, I think, which is very important, many teachers think science is hard. So science as a wall. Next. Okay, so we have some strategies. For example, like we involved more teachers from diversified fields. Now we are trying to contact teachers from social studies, art, and also international education and ocean education, etc. And working with the task forces of more domains and issues. But we need to talk with them one by one. And also we want to link higher education schools for the professors who are doing climate change research. They have some materials, and we want to refrain and represent materials so that we can to find some materials okay for the school teachers. And also we are now developed some useful teaching materials like table games and others videos. And also we work with businesses and NGOs. Next. For example, we work with Greenpeace in Taiwan. As an NGO, well, Greenpeace is a very big international NGOs, and they are very active in Taiwan. Just about 1 month ago, they initiate this Green Future Academy program to invite high school teachers to participate in their climate change education framework programs. Next. And they also offer some videos, some teaching materials so that they can do this online. So basically, we are trying to find all kinds of strategies workable for promote climate change education. Next. Climate change is real in Taiwan. Well, it's a photo taken several days ago. It's an ongoing extreme drought happening in central Taiwan now. So people in Taiwan feels climate change is real, but our current mission is try to promote this so that people would like to take more action to combat climate change. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shin-Cheng. That was fantastic. What a great overview of climate change education in Taiwan. We do have a couple of questions for you before we turn it over to our next speaker. One question is, what advice do you have for educators who want to integrate climate change into their teaching, including those who are afraid of science? What are some things that you might say to them?
Okay. Okay, I have talked to some students, well, major in geography or history, or this kind of majors. I'll tell them that because climate change is actually not just a pure science issues, actually not the 100% environmental issues, because I think that's some factories and economic sectors, they emit greenhouse gases. So that's actually is a sustainability issue, so that we can look at the climate change from different viewpoints. So yeah, everybody can do something for climate change. Well, I think I have been successful to invite some teachers, well, not major in science, and trying to understand climate change from their points of view.
That is great. Well, thank you again, Shin-Cheng. At the end, we will have more questions. So now we are going to go to our next speaker, and this time we're going to get to hear a perspective from the U.S. And I am so excited to introduce Dr. Martha Monroe, who is a professor of environmental education and been a leader in environmental education for years. She's the associate director at the School of Forest Resources and Conservation at the University of Florida. She is so prolific. She's the co-author of 12 books and manuals, including 3 for NAAEE. She's also published 33 book chapters, 80 peer-reviewed journal articles, and 198 extension fact sheets, and served on 160 graduate student committees in her 20 years at the University of Florida. She is an amazing leader in the field, seriously. She's done so much to advance environmental education and environmental education research. And she's worked successfully at the nexus of EE research and practice, and is an expert in program evaluation, professional development, and behavior change to help build capacity and empower people to participate in addressing environmental issues. So Martha, thank you so much for being here, and take it away.
Thanks, Judy. That introduction makes me feel tired. But we'll skip over that. I just wanted to say that I'm delighted to be here today, and I'm happy to be able to speak with both people in Taiwan and people in the United States. It sounds like we have a lot in common and a lot we can learn from each other. Of course, there's lots of different ways to teach about climate change. In the classroom, outdoors, younger students, older students, teachers, curriculum development. Next, please. But there's also a lot of research that we can do, and a lot has been done. If you use the term climate change and the term education in any of the search engines, you get an exponentially increasing number of hits and articles in each decade that we've seen in the last 40 years. So there's a lot of information out there, and that is what helped sponsor our interest in the project that I'm going to tell you about today. And I'm thinking that this orientation and framework could give us some information about how to think about climate change education in the classroom, in the curriculum, in teacher training, and in research. So that's the way we can think about this information. Next slide, please. So what we did was a systematic literature review. Oh, and I should also say that these slides have some information, had some Mandarin language on them, and that's due to Dr. Shin-Cheng, who translated them for me. So thank you very much. I hope they're helpful. So our project was a systematic literature review where we were asking the question, what is it about climate change education programs that makes them successful? We used the search engines to find articles, peer-reviewed literature articles, and we found over 1,000 abstracts. Then we read those abstracts and read those papers and winnowed it down to the group of papers that actually provided evidence of change, that answered that question. We ended up with 49 papers, read those, and synthesized them into 6 common themes, which I'll explain to you today in 3 main points. Next slide, please. So of course, with those 49 papers, there's a wide diversity of context out there. Most of the articles based the climate change education in schools or universities, and most of the students were at least middle school age, high school, university. Some were not in schools at all, but outside the classroom. Some were teacher training and curriculum projects. About half of the articles were based in the United States, and the other half included 12 different countries. Of course, they also varied in what they wanted to convey, what their outcomes were, and most of them focused on climate science, knowledge, some of them about attitudes, and a few of them about behavior and skills. Next slide. So these 3 themes are coming up. The first one was that effective climate science education is relevant, interesting, and engaging. And really, all education is effective if it's relevant, interesting, and engaging. So this isn't completely new and different. But the twist is that even when it's climate science, it needs to be relevant, interesting, and engaging. And I think that some people may not see that connection quite as easily because the greenhouse gases are invisible and the change is global, and so it's hard to be concrete. But here's how they did it. Next slide, please. Most of the effective climate science programs that we looked at in this set of 49 papers found ways to talk about relevant impacts of climate science at the local level where the students were. Sometimes it was about water, sometimes about species range, sea level rise, agricultural crops, fire, storms. There were lots of different ways people made climate science relevant to those students. In some cases, the students were actually collecting their own data, meeting with scientists, and maybe analyzing the data that scientists have collected in other places in the world. Next slide, please. It's that work with science and data that was possible for students to learn about what makes this real, why should we believe it, what are the data out there, and how can we use those data to make interpretations and understanding about how our planet is changing. Next slide. And of course, they used active and engaged teaching methods, like so many of our environmental education programs already do. Some of these activities were outside. Many of these activities were in small groups. So students were learning together and actively orienting their education around the concepts. So they were experiencing the ideas that were being taught. Sometimes in debates, sometimes with worksheets, lots of different ways people did that. Next slide, please. So here's the second of the 3 points, and that is that climate change education can build problem-solving skills when students are actively involved in creating solutions. The papers had examples of doing this in 2 different ways, in the classroom and in the community. Next slide, please. In both cases, these action projects helped involve learners in addressing problems and identifying solutions. And I think what's helpful is that they were able to adjust the scale of the solution to match the scale of the problem. And when they're working at the community level, that's really, really important. I think students can easily get depressed if they think they're supposed to solve global climate change. But if we ratchet that down to how our community is mitigating or adapting climate change, then the solutions become much easier to imagine. And it's easier for people to say, oh, we can do that. We can teach these people, we can run this program, we can plant these trees. So they're learning problem-solving skills, action-taking skills, leadership skills, and building a sense of efficacy, all of which are critical if we want to move toward action taking. Next slide, please. In the community projects, they were all the same as the school with one additional component, and that is there were opportunities to interact with community leaders and actually do something in the community on the ground that would help create mitigation or adaptation possibilities. Next slide. So here's the third main point. And this one gets a little tricky. It might be different than what we've thought about before. And that is that effective climate change education helps learners construct and critique their own thinking, their own ideas. This is particularly important when it comes to misconceptions, scientific misconceptions, when the media or the common way of thinking about climate change is different than what the climate scientists are saying. So when teachers are able to say, why do you think that? What sort of evidence do you have for saying that? Or why would some other people think this? Then we're talking about how we're thinking. And that was really important. Next slide. Some of the research papers that we looked at were really focused around the kinds of ways teachers guided that thinking with questions. What does this graph show? How do you know that? Why do you believe that? What's an example of that happening that you have seen? Is this a claim? Is this a generalization? So clearly, the articles in this theme were linking back to the theme about science and evidence and data and interpretation. But they were also moving a little bit beyond that and looking at misconceptions and also comparing how students think with how other people think. So sometimes argumentation and debate was involved in this theme. And it was really interesting to see how teachers were supporting that and moving students toward thinking about how they're thinking, which is important. Next slide, please. So I can wrap up our little study by reminding you that we had 49 papers out of that huge literature review that resulted in over 1,000 studies. And they boiled down to being able to say that good climate change education is also good education. It's relevant, meaningful, engaging, experiential, and often social because people are working in small groups. It includes project-based work, which is what leads us toward action. It engages learners in exploring what they know and how they know it, and why they know it, and how other people know it, which helps us figure out how to deal with the controversial side of climate change, which sounds like it might be more important in the United States than in Taiwan. So thank you very much. Next slide, please. I think there might be an opportunity for one or two questions.
Yes, thank you so much, Martha. That was really fantastic. Let me just put my video on again. And
Okay.
Really great summary of that research and also those important tips that we all can use. So we do have a lot of questions. We'll save a few for the end so everybody can answer. But one of the questions that came in from Shin-Cheng in South Korea is if somebody is trying to, an educator, integrate climate change into their curriculum, where do they start? How do they think about that? All of these tips are great, but what advice would you have? And it's a big question, but see what you can do with it.
All right, so integrating in the curriculum. Just like Professor Ye said, there's so many different ways climate change can affect almost every component of the curriculum. Just in science, there's of course earth science, but there's also biology, chemistry, physics. But it's not just science, it's social studies, it's culture, it's policy, it's economics. And we can't do work in either of those broad areas unless we have math skills, English skills, language skills, whatever language people speak. So if we think about what we want people to be able to do with climate change action, almost every possible career can be connected to mitigation and adaptation possibilities. And that means almost everything we teach in our schools is also related to climate change, or at least we can use examples in the context of climate change to empower and interest students to be involved. So I think it's possible to infuse it almost everywhere. How would you do that? I would make a team of people, teachers who know the curriculum and people who know the climate science and the adaptations and the mitigation. And I'd lock them in a room until they come up with some great ideas. And they'll be able to scaffold those ideas across the age levels so that there's ways of introducing it, maybe at the middle school, and then building on those concepts as students get older.
Thank you, Martha. That's so great. And we'll save the last two. We have two additional questions for the end so everybody can answer those. So thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. And now we are going to go to our last speaker, and last but not least, of course, is Jen Kretser, who is the Director of Climate Initiatives at the Wild Center. And through this role, Jen leads the center's youth climate program that works to engage with and empower youth around the world to take action on climate change. Perfect for this webinar. Under her direction, the program has been recognized by the White House and the Environmental Protection Agency in the U.S. She has taken part in the United Nations Climate Change Conference and the Climate Reality Project, and she's also part of the new Coalition for Climate Education Policy to help ensure that climate education policies are supporting all of our work at the state and national level. So Jen, thank you so much for being here, and take it away. Here we go.
Thank you so much, Judy. I'm just waiting to see the slides pop up.
Okay, you should be able to see that. Nope, we're on the first slide.
Nope, I can share, Judy.
Oh, you can't see it?
No, hold on.
Okay, I'm not sure what happened. Okay, give us a minute. Yeah.
I'll do this, Judy.
Okay. Great, thanks, Melissa.
Great.
And can you see that? Okay.
I can. Can you put it in the presenter mode, please? So it's not showing the notes. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. And I'm so honored to be here today. Again, my name is Jen Kretser. I'm the Director of Climate Initiatives at the Wild Center. Next slide, please. I'm coming to you from the traditional and contemporary lands of the Haudenosaunee people. Our Science Center focuses on igniting a connection to nature, where people and nature can thrive together and offer an example to the world. We do this through educational programming, exhibitions, and outreach, as well as being a demonstration and education site for green building, design, sustainability, and climate solutions. Next slide, please. Today, I'm really excited to share with you, and it's great to come after Martha. You really teed me up well to share some of our examples of climate work and offer some resources that you can utilize anywhere in the world. So I'll be sharing some practical examples that our Science Center has been working on for the past almost 14 years now. And I wanted to just take a moment and say that, informal education institutions, as well as NGOs and non-community-based organizations, such as museums, zoos, and aquariums, serve as a really critical role for community outreach and partnerships as economic engines, anchors, and support education, job training, and access to information. In the US alone, over 850 million people visit informal education institutions each year, and that's more than all of the sporting events and amusement parks combined. So museums are considered one of the most trustworthy information sources in America, and have a really high trust rating, like over 70% trust rating. So thinking about the role of climate change education in your community and how you're implementing programming, be thinking about ways in which your institution, organization, agency can help build public trust in science, as well as help to be a place where people can look to for information, for education and programming. Next slide, please. So as I start to share, and we heard a little bit about this from Martha already, so I'm pleased to talk about some of the values that we've developed for our climate change education programs at the Wild Center over the past 12 years. This suite of values helps to guide and inform our work and was developed in partnership with the youth that we work with, primarily high school students, as well as our advisors, our staff, and community participants. And program participants. So building on Martha's comments earlier, the programs that we work on are very much place-based. They're solutions-focused and action-oriented. They build on working with youth in partnership and being youth-led. They center equity and justice, recognizing that climate change disproportionately impacts communities of color, and that in order to transition to a just and sustainable future, we need to make sure everyone is included in those in the decision-making processes and in programming. And we work to be hopeful. So we want to make change that is building on that hope and building on and building people's agency and empowerment to work on solutions collectively. Next slide, please. So I want to share with you a series of case studies that we've been, of programs we've been doing at the museum. So with thinking about climate change education, I want to offer that that we want to be thinking about a whole of education approach, that it's not just, you know, in the formal school situations, but it's also informal, as I've already mentioned. It's working and thinking about public education and engagement, access to information, how we train and provide job training for a new generation of workforce to shift to our renewable energy, and to really think about how we might build a whole of society approach to taking on climate change action. So the first example I'd like to share is our youth climate summits. So for the past 12 years, the museum has been convening and inspiring young people, primarily high school and college age, through youth climate summits. There are 1 to 3 day events and can be held either in person or virtually, as we've learned over the last year, to learn about climate science, impacts, and solutions. Youth participate in workshops, hands-on activities, networking with other schools and experts across sectors and that are working on climate change. The model is a really powerful vehicle for convening learning, community engagement, inspiration, and for youth leadership development. And the summits are acting as catalysts for youth to raise awareness about climate change and take action in their schools and communities. Next slide, please. We do want to make sure that there's strong place-based knowledge and make sure that that is relevant and meaningful, because that provides a foundation for discussion and local action. If climate change education is going to become a force for change, the outcomes, though, must shift from just learning about climate change and understanding climate change to actually that action. So thinking about how you can build that agency and empowerment to work on projects in your schools and community. Next slide, please. So at the center of our Youth Climate Summit program, we have, we work on climate action plans. So these are youth-driven, youth-powered action plans where students identify local challenges, whether it's in their schools and or their communities, and create a solutions framework through that self-defined action. This, you know, so I'm not telling students what to do. They're driving their projects through their own passions and through their own engagement. We're just providing that in terms of being a mentor and a coach to the students. So these projects are really wide-ranging, and I'm going to provide some examples of what they look like. Next slide, please. So for example, one school created water bottle refilling stations to encourage students to bring reusable water bottles to school. The students work to meet with their teachers, facility staff, their principals to make the best decisions. And then they also worked on raising funds to install a water bottle refilling station, and provided water bottles, refillable water bottles to all the students in the school. Next slide, please. In another school, students work to build a garden and a greenhouse to grow fresh local produce for food pantries. So this was a really exciting project that worked on solving multiple problems in the community. So not only were they learning about gardening and building and all the things that go into creating a garden and growing their own food, so keeping things local. They were also recognized that there was an additional issue in their community around hunger. And so the students worked to grow food to help support those food pantries and address hunger in their community where people can come together. And this became very intergenerational. So students were bringing their families to help harvest the food and then connecting with those in need at those food pantries around that community. Next slide, please. Finally, I'd like to share that the students, have gone beyond school. So in some communities, students have actually started working with their municipal or town leaders and community leaders, including here in New York State, what's known as the Climate Smart Communities Program that's run by the state of New York. And students are now serving on task forces that are working on climate resilience. They're helping to make decisions. They're helping to do energy audits in across the communities and look for ways in which communities can both save energy and build climate resilience. And they're leading these efforts. So it's not just that they're participating, but they're oftentimes leading. In small rural communities in New York State, this provides much needed capacity and helps to create intergenerational connections. Next slide, please. So we've been doing these summits for about 13 years now, and we've done close to 90 youth climate summits globally in over 46 different communities. We have a full suite of resources, free resources online to plan your own youth climate summit, and we hope to get those summits started everywhere. So maybe out of this call today, we'll see something happen in Taiwan or elsewhere in the world or in the U.S., and we'd be thrilled to do that. So we'll be sharing information about how you can access all this free information, our network and resources. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share, because climate change isn't just about youth, education needs to happen at all levels. So I want to share very quickly 3 other examples that we've done here at the Wild Center, working with adults and other community members. So a number of years ago, a large Hurricane Irene, hit the northeastern United States. And in our small rural communities, this is one of the main roads that came into our town that was completely devastated. Following this storm, the Wild Center brought together, convened state and local leaders, transportation officials, small town mayors and planners to share stories about what happened to them, to share that lived experience, to process that experience together, to look across the region at emergency services, and to think about how they might approach a storm like this that might happen again in the future, and create plans for resiliency. Next slide, please. Another similar type program that we did was I live in an area that has a lot of winter. Winter really actually just ended here a few weeks ago, and we have a strong tourist economy that's based on winter that is threatened by climate change. And one of the things we did was a program called Winter Green. So we brought together the tourism sector and business leaders to again talk about climate change, to share stories about what they've been seeing over the last few decades about the changing weather patterns in the region, and to discuss how this would actually impact our tourism and our economy. So again, it was place-based, it was relevant, it brought together a group of people that had a vested interest in the economy for the region, and to be thinking about this, how to collaboratively problem solve. Next slide, please. Finally, the last case study I wanted to share is another one that's kind of an unusual role for a science museum to take on. But again, we wanted to, provide education, the whole of education, not just working with young people. So thinking about how we could bring together and create a culture for building green in our region of the world called the Adirondacks. And so what might work in a highly winter seasonal space. So brought together architects, contractors, planners, designers to talk about the building industry and to think about what are the best new practices, how can we build greener, how can we be sustainable. So it's amazing. We do the event every other year, and we're looking forward to bringing all those people together again. Next slide, please. So just in closing, I would like to say that we're so excited to be talking about climate change education, and that thinking about it from a whole of society approach and how you're approaching and thinking about climate change education is really important. So I'm happy to offer those examples, and we'll be sharing resources after. Thanks, Judy.
Jen, thank you so much. So many great ideas in there, from the summits to the intergenerational learning, the community engagement, all building on what Martha and Shin-Cheng had already talked about, I'm going to ask you one question and then we'll open it up to everybody and everybody can come back on. What are the biggest challenges do you feel in getting young people to take climate action and not blur the line between education and advocacy?
Well, I think one of the things that is really important is thinking and how we think about civic engagement. So civic engagement is really around taking action for the collective good. And so that can take a really broad look at, if students are working on a community garden, or students are working on, or youth are working on writing letters, or working on doing presentations or community events, that thinking about, education and advocacy from that broader lens of civic engagement, I think can help students see that there are a lot of options out there, and providing examples of what those options might look like, and helping them to plug into the passions that match what their interests are.
Well, thanks, Jen. And if all the speakers could come back on, that is perfect answer. I hope you've looked at the questions too in the chat. Kosai said, great job, Jen. We've had really wonderful comments, Martha and Shin-Cheng. I'm gonna read a few questions at once and you can answer whichever one you want. Gus Medina asked, as a way of encouraging higher collaboration in schools, could they be engaged to help reduce their climate change footprint as a way to achieve national climate change goals? So that's one, looking at the school footprint. Joan Haley asked, are there any indications, and Martha, this might have been for you, that teachers as role models played a role, but for any of you, you could think about that. And then we had another question about, let me just find it here, about how to measure community action. Are there ways that we can think about how to measure the impact of those community projects? And that's from Qian Chen. So think about all of those, the school footprint, the idea of measuring the impact of community projects, and teachers as role models. Anybody want to go first?
Well, I can start with the role model question, because I think that's true for teachers as well as students, and all people. According to the work from Albert Bandura about self-efficacy, we build our own ability to do things by seeing others. And we could watch them, we could learn about them, we could read about them. So role models are really helpful at helping all of us imagine what we can do. So one thing I don't know is the degree to which teachers need to be able to, teachers have done those things in order for students to use their teacher as a role model. Do teachers need to be active in the community in order for students to learn to be active in the community? And maybe Jen could answer that with her Youth Climate Summit example. I think kids need to see somebody active in some community to be able to translate it to their own lives.
Thanks, Martha.
I would add to that, Martha, that, I think that, well, one, I think that students can also be role models for teachers and adults. But I do also believe that having, I think of it as like having mentors, and it could be a teacher, or it could be someone from, say, a science center or from a nonprofit organization. I mean, we need partnerships in order to do the work that needs doing. And so having that, those constellations of partners in communities that can work together on all of these issues, whether it's the measuring community impacts, whether it's acting as a role model, where it's doing the school footprint, we can all work together to do this, the collective action.
Okay, for the community issues, because many elementary schools, especially in Taiwan, built in communities. So we work with the communities, actually mostly in the area of disaster prevention and mitigation. So our strategy is that we work with the task force for disaster prevention and try to implement some ideas about the climate change, so that they have the sense of community. We just emphasize place-based issues. So we want to link climate change to their daily lives. I think that's the next step that we would like to do, because they just don't think climate change is something will be included in examinations, but well, they can be included in their daily lives. I think that's the situation here, because I think we have well, some cultural and institutional differences, between Asia and the North America.
Well, thanks to all three of you. One last question, and then we'll go to the closing. Yana Malari asked, what can climate organizers that are doing youth climate organizations do during the pandemic? Because we know in many parts of the world, the pandemic is not under control. Any guidance for folks on thinking about what can happen during these really difficult times?
I can start on that question. You know, it's been a really hard 14 going on 16 months for everyone everywhere, and I hope that one thing that we've been trying to do is offer space for sort of emotional support for learning for teachers and students, like, you know, offering, say, an, you know, virtual and digital interaction, but making it less about content and more about maybe something fun like an art project or a place where they can come together and talk about what's happening, or, you know, providing that social and emotional support right now, I think is really, really important as schools are coming back online and are coming back into session, or people are looking for a connection to community, and just being there for people.
Yep. Thanks, Jen. And oh, go ahead, Martha. And I do want to hear one last word from everybody about what gives you hope after we talk about the pandemic here. So Martha, go ahead. You were going to say something?
Yeah, I was just thinking that for the communities that do have good internet access, some things just haven't stopped. The pandemic has just made it more distant. Like this webinar, people are finding ways to connect with folks far, far away that they never would have talked to prior to that. So there could be some things that because of the pandemic, we're able to connect more with other people. And that's good.
Great.
Okay, in Taiwan, well, we have been very good for 1.5 years, but now we are in a very bad situation. But because many people, well, we are very convenient to get connected on the internet, so we are now preparing more digital things for any kind of education. Several days from now, I will hold a workshop for design climate change games, and all online. Over 30 people, 30 teachers, just working together online. I think we will try to find more things that can be used online.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, going one by one thing that gives you hope for the future, and then we'll end this. So I'm going to start with you, Shin-Cheng. One thing that gives you hope about thinking about the future and climate and what we can do.
Okay, I think many countries now committed themselves to carbon neutrality on net zero carbon emission. I think it gives us some hope that we can work together. I think, well, it's a feeling of hope. It's very important.
Thanks, Shin-Cheng. Martha?
Ditto on the same thing. And I'd also like to go back to the community action and impact. Because this is climate change, because it's a complex issue, I think there's opportunities to look at ways through the systems thinking perspective or a ripple effect that we're making impacts in ways that we might not have thought before. And so that would be a hopeful way to look at impacts.
Thank you, Martha. And Jen, last word.
Well, I think that things like this make me feel super hopeful. There's so many people I know on this call today that are these bright spots, bright stars in the sky, and there's so many more of us out there, and figuring out ways to connect those bright spots into constellations, and then maybe start building galaxies of hope. That's where I try to, that gets me out of bed every day, knowing that there's amazing people around the world working on this issue, and we're all working on it together.
Thank you all so much for the great presentations. And I want to not only thank all of you, but if everybody else could turn their videos on, Melissa, Elisa, who's on our communication team, Nina, Maury, you all did such a fabulous job. And everybody will get a copy of the recording. And we also hope that you will fill out the survey, the event survey. We always like to learn more about how we can do a better job, and hope that you all keep up the great work you are doing. Melissa, if you can hit the next slide. And in the next few days, when we send the recording, feel free to share it with your colleagues. But thank you all so much. Such an honor to be here. You did a fantastic job. And I look forward to hearing from all of you in the future. And thanks to all of you who joined us today for the great questions. And thanks for being part of this bilateral series on climate education. And hopefully we'll have more in the future. Thanks, everyone. Take care. Have a good morning, good night, good afternoon. Take care.